I love this quote. It's from a book in 1970 called Future Shock by the great futurist Alvin Toffler, where he said the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who can't read and write. It'll be those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn.
Can you achieve extraordinary results while making the world a better place? I'm Bruce Temkin, and together we'll explore how. Welcome to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Join me as I speak with visionary leaders and top experts to uncover the secrets of humanity-centric leadership. Ready to rethink leadership? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to Humanity at Scale. Work is changing fast. New skills are emerging, job boundaries are shifting, and AI is becoming part of how everyday work gets done. Many leaders can feel the acceleration, even if the path forward isn't obvious. And it raises a critical question. How do you lead and maintain your humanity when the structure of work itself is changing? Today's guest is one of the world's leading thinkers on that challenge. Ravin Jesuthasan is an authority on the future of work, a senior partner and global leader for transformation services at Mercer, a major voice at the World Economic Forum, and the author of several influential books, including his latest, The Skills-Powered Organization. Ravin has spent decades helping organizations understand how work is changing and what it takes to stay human, adaptive, and resilient in the middle of all this disruption. Ravin, thank you for joining me on Humanity at Scale.
Oh, my pleasure, Bruce. It's lovely to be here with you.
Now, before we get into the big shift in how work gets done, I want listeners to understand the path that shaped your perspective. So let's start with your journey. What first drew you into the world of work, talent, and organizational systems?
Yeah, Bruce, I like to think of my journey as being one of just perpetual reinvention. So I think of myself as a retreaded finance guy. I'm a chartered financial analyst. A lot of my early career was very quantitative and in finance. I was a strategy consultant at Accenture for a number of years, and then came to an organization called Towers Perrin, where I had the great privilege of being thrown into a whole variety of different roles. I ran a number of different businesses for them, went from strategy consulting to organizational consulting to human capital consulting. But the thing that has been the one constant, Bruce, or the two constants, have been my curiosity about what makes organizations work. And how do we bring progressively more science and discipline to how we organize work, how we connect people to work, how we manage that human experience, as opposed to it just being every manager's random experience of trying to engage a team, right? So how do we build on that great history and legacy of thought leadership of many thinkers before? And how do we bring a commercial edge, if you will, to how we sort of manage the workforce and the organization? I then wrote my first book with Professor John Boudreau from USC. And John and I have since written 4 books together. And I've also written a book with a group of colleagues from the Fast Future Executive called The Fast Future Blur, which gets at the convergence of multiple trends and technologies and how that's reshaping work. And then my last book, as you just called it out, was The Skills-Powered Organization. I also am an executive fellow at the Kellogg Business School, where I teach a new program there called Re-envisioning Work and Organizations for the Intelligent Age. So, like I said, it's been a journey of perpetual reinvention, Bruce.
Awesome. And I'm going to, in the end, I want to have you thinking in the background about what your next reinvention is going to be in the future. But for now, let's focus on your latest book, The Skills-Powered Organization. It makes a compelling case that skills, not jobs, are becoming the real backbone of how work gets done. So I'd love to explore some of the ideas you lay out there. Like, what does it mean for leaders when skills become the core building block of work?
Yeah. And maybe I'll talk for a quick second, Bruce, about what's driving that, right? Because skills are not new. Skills have been a part of our vocabulary since the beginning of time, probably, right? But what we are seeing is a much greater focus on the need for a smaller set of building blocks for work to be able to respond to the volatility of change. If you think of some of the geopolitical issues, to be able to respond to the rapid pace with which AI is shrinking the half life of many different technical skills. Um, Equally, skills are also becoming important on the supply side of the equation as it relates to being able to connect people to work based on their ability to do the work rather than what we've traditionally relied on, which are degrees, certifications, quote unquote pedigree. Um, so opening the aperture to people who can actually do the work based on the skills they have rather than these other, maybe more opaque markers of capability. So there's two forces that are driving the need for these smaller building blocks, which I think take us from that traditional one-to-one relationship between a degree, a person, and a position to increasingly the many-to-many between the unique bundle of skills that is Bruce versus Ravin, the unique and different ways in which we could contribute to an organization's business and execute against its work, as well as the places that those skills could take us next, right? Based on skill adjacencies, etc. And it's where we're seeing AI both being a driving force for these smaller building blocks, but also being an enabler for us to infer the skills people have, to be able to connect them to work differently and to do it at much greater velocity than that traditional notion of a job.
So I'd love to. We'll get to AI in a second. I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of AI in our discussion. But in terms of the connection between hiring a person for a role, and that role has a set of requirements that are sort of static, which is the world we came from, right? How do you think about hiring? You still have to hire someone to do something, right? How do you translate what you need from them into a set of skills, recognizing, like you said, that you don't know exactly what skills they're going to apply necessarily in the evolution of whatever they're going to be doing?
Yeah. So the traditional model has typically been I would hire you largely based on the technical skills that I think you have because you graduated with this degree in engineering, right? And I've got an engineering position. And so it was largely your technical skills that were the markers of your ability to contribute. And companies back then, which, as we all know, this is changing very quickly now. Back then, would say, okay, you know what? I recognize that Bruce is going to be, it's going to take Bruce some time to get productive. He's going to learn some things. He's going to break some things. He's going to make some mistakes. But our business model is built around that tolerance to be able to take someone from an entry level position and get him or her, to make their mistakes, to be successful and productive. And then they become the manager that then can teach the person who comes after them, right? What you're now seeing are two big changes. One is instead of me hiring you for the technical skills you have, because I could do that in the past because those technical skills were supposed to see you through a 30-year career. But increasingly, as the half-life of those technical skills shrinks, if you think of Python, gosh, if you think of prompt engineering, right? 3 years ago, prompt engineering was the hottest new job. It went in about 9 months very quickly from being a job that was distinct because people needed this position to interface between them and generative AI and large language models to being a skill that we all needed to interface with that technology to increasingly become kind of is it really a skill we need? Because the large language models now are so much better at interacting with us and extracting information, even though we're really bad at articulating it, that it's become kind of a non-issue, right? And that's in just 3 years. We've seen something that was going to be the next hottest job to being kind of meh, not really relevant anymore. And so what you're seeing now is people shifting from saying, I'm going to hire you for the technical skills to, Bruce, I'm going to hire you for, yes, you can do the technical skills today, but I'm really going to hire you because you have the curiosity, the learning agility, the critical thinking, the ability to work in a multicultural environment in a global organization. All of those things that are going to keep you relevant, not for the job today, but for that longer term, because I don't know how the business is going to evolve and I don't know what new skills are being demanded, but I'm going to ensure that when I hire you, I know that you have the ability, the curiosity, the wherewithal to stay relevant, even as those new things emerge. So, this pivot from technical skills to human and transferable skills that can be transferred across different domains is where we're seeing this big pivot.
So it's interesting. It sounds like that pivot it would be challenging for a hiring manager because if you think about a hiring manager who has a set of objectives that they have to do, what you're saying is don't hire for someone who may optimize you getting what you need done with that job at this moment, which is what they might have done in the past, but have a broader view beyond what you want that person to be doing with the organization future. And it sounds like that's easier for a senior executive to envision across a large organization than it is for an individual hiring manager who at that moment in time has work that needs to get done.
That's a great point. And I think of it as an and, Bruce, because instead of saying like you can only hire the technical skills, it's yes, we need the technical skills now, and we need someone who can stay relevant for the long term because the cost of talent acquisition, as you know, is exceptionally high. And just as the economics of teaching someone an accounting degree are increasingly being challenged because the shelf life or the half life of that accounting degree has gone from 30 years to under 7, I think, by most estimates. And so just as you aren't going to pay $300,000 to get a degree that's only going to keep you in work for 7 years, the same way when you hire someone, I think more and more organizations asking the question of can this person stay relevant for the future? And I do think, in all of the work that I do with companies globally, as you know, Bruce, in the popular press, there's a lot of information about how entry-level hiring has really stalled across the economy generally. And it's stalled not, many will point the blame to AI. I think it's less to do with the reality of AI and more to do with the potential of AI, because we know AI is going to change the work. And I don't want to roll the dice to hire someone who I'm going to have to spend 3 years training if in 3 years that person, if in less than that, that person may have no longer have the skills that I need because those skills have been rendered obsolete. So it's really kind of a risk mitigation strategy, and it's a very natural one, I think, to want to hold off until we have clarity. And I think that's where this notion of skills becomes really important because you get to be more precise with these smaller building blocks than that large monolithic university degree matched to a position.
So inherent in the discussion is a hypothesis, I think, that I love, which is that organizations are trying to figure out how to keep their human capital for a longer period, right? Because another way to deal with this problem, which I think we see a little bit now, is we'll just churn employees, right? When the skills don't match, we'll get rid
Yep.
of them. We'll get new skills, right? That's a
Yep.
model to deal with the same uncertainty and change.
Precisely.
Are you seeing leaders stepping up and saying we need to focus more on longevity of our employees and get rid of that churn thinking?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked that question, Bruce, because that really was the impetus for this last book, The Skills Powered Organization. Because as you know, my co-author is the Chief Strategy and Chief People Officer at Standard Chartered Bank, 175-year-old global bank with a presence in Europe and in most of the developing world, including the Middle East, East Asia, and Africa. And the journey, Bruce, started with one number. So their business was changing really quickly. You had this explosion in the upper middle class in many of their markets, like the Middle East and South Asia. You had this pivot towards more digital intensity in the business. And so the board said, look, we have to go through a transformation to keep up with this changing demand profile. Now, they could have done what companies typically do, which is what you described, right? When we have a restructuring, we do a reduction in force and we get rid of a bunch of legacy skills over here And then we go out and we chase the sexy new skills paying above market premiums. But what my co-author and I were able to show the board was that by reskilling people from what they call their sunset jobs to their sunrise jobs, they could actually save 50,000 British pounds per employee. And multiplied by the 40,000 people who would need to be transitioned, that's a pretty darn big number. And inherent in that, Bruce, was the fact that, if you think of two large buckets of skills, right? Technical skills and these human and transferable skills. I can teach you technical skills really quickly. I can teach, a long time ago, LinkedIn Learning, when it was lynda.com, they used to have this commercial, I think, that was, if you're a hairdresser who wants to become a programmer, we can get you there in 3 months. I think if I'm remembering correctly, this was a long time ago. But inherent in that statement was that we could teach most people the technical skills required, right? Provided there are some adjacencies to their existing skills, etc. What takes a lot of time are those human skills. How do I teach you about collaborating in a cross-cultural environment? How do I teach you about critical thinking? How do I teach you about working in this environment where things aren't fully documented, but the reason you're successful is because of the network of people because you know how to get things done. And so that really was behind that calculus of that one number of 50,000 pounds was it's much more efficient for us to make the most of the people we've invested in for decades and keep them relevant rather than discard them and try to chase the sun, if you will, by trying to hire the next generation of talent, praying that we can get them productive and successful in a reasonable time.
So it's interesting because if you think about the shift from hiring for skills that you said are relatively, and it's all relative, right? Relatively easy to teach, to hiring for skills that are a little bit more innate and less focused, sort of means that though there's going to be a set of people who don't have those innate skills, those innate human skills, who are going to be left out, right? Because when the world was we're hiring for skills we can teach, the world is open for everyone, right? We can teach everyone those skills. What do we do to make sure that we're not leaving behind too many people from the workforce who don't have those innate human skills that you think are critical?
So my hypothesis, Bruce, of having sort of studied this space for close to 35 years is the percentage of skills that are truly innate, where you either have it or you don't, is really small. So I'll go back to critical thinking, curiosity, and learning agility. All of those things. I'll go back to that example. If I hire Bruce, and in 3 years he's going to that experience of working in the organization is going to start to build some of those skills. I think we can absolutely teach critical thinking by exposing people to different domains, getting them to think outside of their domains, pushing them into different directions. I think we can, sort of build up people's curiosity and their learning agility by getting them to see connections to the things they know. All of those things, I think, are things we can build. And I think it's also why we're starting to see a shakeout between what is done by companies versus what is going to be expected from the educational sector, because the educational sector was told, produce the technical skills. We, the organization, will teach them all these other skills, right? The human skills, the innate things. We'll develop that over the course of their career with us. I think that calculus is going to shift very quickly, where the educational sector is going to be told, we don't just want the technical skills. We need talent that is work ready. And by that, it's, yes, the technical skills, but all of these other skills with them, so that when they hit the ground, I'm not spending 3 years teaching Ravin and Bruce how to be successful in this organization. They're able to be successful in 3 months because they're coming in, quote unquote, fully formed. And I think that's where education really needs to move from purely academia to a combination of academia and vocational training. And you're seeing a lot more of this. Many will point to Switzerland and Germany as, boy, they've been doing it forever. Yes, they have. But they've been doing it forever in kind of narrow domains, right? And I think what you're going to see is this is going to be a requirement of every person coming out of school. This ability to be dropped into an organization and be able to be productive, that traditional boundary between I learn versus I do is really going to start to, sort of blend, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I've hired over the years dozens, probably more than 100 research associates in different roles, right? Fresh out of school. And the luck I've had was, over the years, figuring out that hiring liberal arts majors did better than technical majors. So is this a resurgence of the liberal arts in sort of hiring programs?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a recognition, Bruce, that you know, I have the privilege of having gone through the British educational system, having lived in the UK and Malaysia, and then having actually also gone to school in this country. I think this is kind of, we're starting to realize that the breadth of education that the United States has traditionally afforded our kids is a massive asset because it builds all of that capability in those different domains, right? It builds the curiosity, it builds the learning agility, it builds that pie-shaped leader, the symbol pi, who is deep in a couple of areas, but she can look across and see those connections because of that breadth of exposure that we typically give our kids. In the UK, when I was studying there, at about the age of 15, we went really deep into science. I stopped learning history and geography. I stopped learning about politics, etc. It was really heavy duty chemistry and math and physics, etc., which is great for depth. The problem is, it's those technical skills that AI is now sort of substituting and augmenting at real scale. And if I haven't gotten the learned experience, from those other domains, my ability to, again, see connections, to apply knowledge in different domains, to stay relevant, I think get compromised. So long-winded response to, I really think we're starting to recognize what that breadth means and are hopefully starting to treasure it a little bit more rather than continuously pointing to other countries and saying their education systems are better.
If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss a conversation. We've got plenty more great stories coming your way. So while we're on this topic, I just want to sort of freeform a little bit and get you to be, let's say you're the guru, because I'm not sure we have a position of education in the US, right? And give you leverage to make recommendations. No one owns that role, so you're not the Secretary of Education who does whatever. But if you could advise the U.S. educational system at large, what
Yeah.
recommendations do you think would help prepare the U.S. citizens for this new future of skills?
So I would do a number of things. Firstly, I would ensure that the corporate sector is fully vested in the educational sector. And what I mean by that is fully vested in shaping the curriculum so that the corporate sector knows that when talent comes in, they are ready for their operating model. And you see that in a number of communities. I live in Chicago. The Chicago Apprenticeship Network is a great example of that, where all of the financial services organizations that are part of that network have shaped the curriculum that is, I think it's the Harold Washington School. Specifically, in one instance that I'm familiar of is around forensic accounting. So they know that when talent comes from there, that they have the skills they need, that it's specifically what they need. They also ensure that people have the opportunity to intern within the organization. So again, that when they graduate, they are truly work ready. So if I've interned at JP Morgan, I get a position with JP Morgan when I've finished. So because I'm now a known quantity, my business leaders know that I can do the work, I've demonstrated it, etc. So I think business leaders need to be vested in that. They need to shape the curriculum. I think education, and we've seen this with the Harvard Business School, for example, where I think if you graduate from HBS, you don't just get that 4-year degree, you have unlimited free access to all of their learning resources. So this recognition from educational institutions that you're not there to produce someone with a 4-year degree, you're there to keep them relevant for a 40-year career. So how do and I think commercially it makes a lot more sense, right? Rather than just collecting tuition for 4 years, now you've got a relationship with a much broader community. Um, I also think, and the Singapore government does this really well, government needs a real role in sort of making sure that strategic investments in skills, things that are of national importance, that we are actively working with the educational sector, NGOs, and the private sector to develop those skills, to make sure those skills are commercialized, etc., so that we aren't then in a position of finding, oh, we've outsourced all of this stuff to some other part of the world, and now that's a matter of sort of national security. So I do think we have an opportunity to be a lot more planful, with government orchestrating this in a much more thoughtful way.
Well, let's go back to companies. We talked about AI, right? And you talked about the discussion. AI has two parts to this, right? One part is creating the demand for it based on shortening skills life cycles and all of that. But there's the flip side you talked about too. AI can be helpful in this process. So maybe talk us through how AI and other tools can be helpful in making the transition.
Yeah, so I think it was really helpful in a number of ways. What I break this down, Bruce, into sort of three areas, right? One is having good signals of changing demand for work, and that's something that we're really bad at, as in most organizations, of getting timely and strong signals of how the work is changing and what does that mean for the skills required. That's why AI can be tremendously powerful, whether it's scanning the marketplace of changing job requisitions around the country to see how similar roles are changing, how your competitors are shifting their skills profile, to actually being able to translate how, as your customer's demand is changing, what does that then mean for your product? What does that then mean for how you deliver that product? And what does that mean for the skills of all of the people in that value chain? So there is a demand signal generation piece that AI can be helpful for. The second piece, I think, where it can be helpful is in inferencing skills on the supply side. So in most organizations today, the way I know that Bruce has these skills versus Ravin is there is some sort of assessment that's done. Increasingly, what we're finding is algorithms, and a number of these platforms do this already, can infer the skills that Bruce has versus Ravin based on the projects you've done, your education, the type of work you've taken on, etc. And, is it perfect? No, but it's a good enough signal, and we can generate it much more quickly and in a timely fashion. So you've got the demand signal, you've got the supply signal. Now, when you understand the gap, AI can then come back to you with very specific, personalized and contextualized skill development options. Here's a particular course. Here is the use of VR and XR. So as you're doing this work, you can acquire the additional skills associated with it. So AI is supporting the closing of those skills gap. And then the third part of the equation is where AI can help deploy those skills back to work productively. And this is where we see companies using things like internal talent marketplaces. So you have an algorithm that says, hey, Bruce, we know that you're on this job in finance. IT has a project that requires the skills you're interested in. It also is an opportunity that is an area of interest for you because it lets you apply those skills in a different domain. And you can take that on for 5% of your time, etc. So AI continuously nudging people to connect with work at a much higher velocity than that traditional model of I have to go out and hire someone and it's going to take me 6 months to fill the position. Versus I can connect Bruce and a bunch of other people to a project. The work can get done in 3 months, and then they can move on and take other projects.
So it's interesting. It sounds like besides I want to go at the individual level, that it's lowering the transaction cost in matching an individual with a project. If that's the case, then is the structure of work going to be much more focused on projects and less on sort of set structures in the future, given that lower transactional cost?
100%. So in the book, Bruce, we talk about three models for work. the fixed, the flexible, and the flow model. The fixed model is that traditional job-based model, right? And that model is going to continue, particularly where there is a premium on compliance and control. Because the job is often the most predictable and stable way for work to be done. However, we're seeing a lot more work move into that flexible model. The flexible model is where people are in a job, but just like that example, they have the flexibility to express their skills in different domains or the flexibility to take on a project and acquire some new skills. So more and more organizations introducing that flexible model. Unilever today, I think all 70,000 of their white-collar talent have the flexibility to create projects or to take on projects. And that is a massive economic gain for many organizations because it exponentially improves their management of their labor capacity. And then the third model is what I think of as being agile on steroids, and it probably applies to maybe 5 to 15% of the workforce, but it's specifically where we need certain scarce skills, AI, data scientists, AI developers, etc. But we need them across the business because we need AI talent not just in IT, but in finance and revenue management and HR. And the flow model says everyone might be an employee, they're just not organized in jobs within functions. Instead, they're being connected to work through projects and assignments and gigs continuously. And we have a case study in the book where an organization, insurance company no less, moved all its data scientists from that fixed model to the flow model and got to a 600% gain in productivity in 18 months.
The flow almost sounds like if you're doing for part is this sort of the notion of shared services, right? That's sort of how the shared services are conceptualized, right?
Correct.
Finite set of things shared. So how do you move from the mental model of shared services? Because I think someone might just go and say, all right, well, we'll set up a group of centralized data scientists and AI engineers, but that's not what you're saying. How do you get people to think about it differently?
Yeah. So in this, the big pivot from shared services are, in this instance, what the organization is saying is all data science work, is not going to be done, in a dedicated job by someone in IT. Instead, it's going to be in an agile pool. And that agile pool is continuously moving from one project to another. People in that particular example are organized into their tribes. So I've got my data science tribe. It's my community. We learn together, etc. But I'm connected to work in squads. So I might be the data scientist, Bruce. You might be the DevOps person. There's someone else who's the UI UX designer. We all come together in a squad to solve a problem. That problem is solved. There is a budget with the problem. There is an incentive associated with successful execution. And then we move on to the next project. And so what you now have is this high velocity environment. And again, I think it's particularly relevant when you've got skills that are in really high demand, which are scarce in supply. And so every organization today where we started this conversation, is becoming an AI-powered business model, right? How do we ensure that AI is being infused into every facet and every process? How do we ensure that those processes are being re-envisioned? And that's where this talent this is becoming a pinch point in many organizations. And unless you go from to that fix to the flow model, it will remain a pinch point in organizations.
Yeah, the flow model absolutely gets you the agility. And I'm thinking we need new skills. We need people to learn how to be tribe leaders and squad leaders, right?
Yep.
As opposed to managers of organizations going
Precisely.
forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's easy, before we talk about the future a little bit, it's an interesting, and I love the concept. I've worked with lots of organizations and, I'm not bad information about HR organizations, but there are very few HR organizations I've run across that are prepared to drive this level of transformation. So how
Absolutely.
does this happen in an organization? Who drives it, and what do they need to do to get there?
Yeah, so I think this is, a massive opportunity for HR, right? HR has talked for decades about having a seat at the table. And I think the conditions are right because AI is forcing this re-envisioning of how talent is deployed, how talent is developed. And HR has an opportunity to sort of re-engineer and reconfigure that people model so it's much more in sync with the evolving operating model as well as the technology model of the organization. Um, you know, I'll go back to Standard Chartered Bank, right? One of the reasons I partnered with Tanuj was she was so progressive. She was absolutely at the right hand of Bill Winters, their CEO, in driving this transformation across the organization. And it was a transformation that, if you look at their numbers over the 4 years, they've consistently broken their earnings records in large part because they've moved to this much more agile model. And it's been fascinating to watch, Bruce, because, it was the mantra early on was this is a journey where no one is going to be left behind. We're going to ensure we are transparent, we're clear with people, and we're being open with people as to how the work is changing and the fact that we're going to be, this is how it's changing and you need to keep up. We're going to give you the opportunity to keep up. They started off with building a learning habit, is what they called it. Where every part of the business, every person has, I think their learning hours increased from, I'm going to get the number wrong, from like 20 hours a year to something like 80 hours a year. So literally 2 full weeks of dedicated learning. I've participated in their learning weeks. It's kind of funny because I did a session with her, and then they had the manager of Liverpool football team, who they are sponsors of, do a session on leadership, you know, and suffice to say, there were a lot more people in his session than mine, um, but to me, what was instructive was just the breadth of opportunity, right? And it goes back to where we started this conversation of how do I build those innate skills, those things that are going to engender curiosity, that are going to keep you relevant, even as you continuously acquire new technical skills, but having those human skills that are going to power you for the rest of your life.
That's great. And that's a good place to sort of transition into my closing questions. This is wonderful. These are the questions I ask everyone. The first one is, what's one leadership skill you think will become even more important in the future?
I'm going to state the really obvious one, Bruce. It is real AI fluency. Every business model, as you and I know, is going to need to be an AI-powered one. And I am truly terrified every time I facilitate a CEO panel or a CHRO panel and I ask people, how many of you are using those, pick your vendor of choice, right? Um, LLM, Gen AI licenses, and people sheepishly put, one or two hands up. Every business leader needs real AI fluency because how are you going to orchestrate? How are you going to role model for your workforce the sorts of behaviors that we need from every single person?
And if you could wave a magic wand and immediately make things change, what would you do to make organizations more humanity-centric?
I would change the calculus of how we transform. I would have the people at the front lines, the people doing the work every day, be the ones who are providing the insight, be the ones who are testing new solutions, be the ones who are sort of helping us transform. I think of that Standard Chartered example, right? Having those folks drive the change rather than these top-down corporate narratives. Having each of us as workers redesign our own jobs around these machine capabilities so that the business model is changing, but it's being powered by the front lines rather than the front lines bearing the brunt of some top-down change.
Oh, it's interesting. It's almost like when we think about those roles, in the flexible world, 90% of the time is doing that job, but we mentally assign 10% of that time in redesigning that job, right? And
Yes.
that's all part of the job.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And what's one final piece of advice you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I think I'll end with a quote, actually. So I love this quote. It's from a book in 1970 called Future Shock by the great futurist Alvin Toffler, where he said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who can't read and write. It'll be those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I think it's the perfect metaphor for the times we're in, because so much of what we've traditionally believed is being challenged, and we're being challenged to relearn some things that I think we might have forgotten, as well as learning a heck of a lot of new stuff.
Awesome. And if people want to follow your work and go deeper into the ideas you champion, where should we send them?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn, Ravin Jesuthasan. They can also visit my website, ravinjesuthasan.com. They can visit the Mercer website, mercer.com, which has some amazing resources from my colleagues as well. And then I'm also on X.
Awesome. Ravin, thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Bruce.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Ravin. Now let's dive into the after show, a segment where I'll reflect on key takeaways from this discussion. Welcome to the after show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ravin as much as I did. There's a lot in it, not just about AI or skills, but about how we rethink the very relationship between people, work, and organizations. What stood out to me is how quietly radical his message is. The future of work isn't just about new tools or new job titles. It's about redesigning systems so humans can keep learning, keep contributing, and keep mattering as everything around them speeds up. Here are 5 key takeaways that really stayed with me. The first is that reinvention isn't optional anymore for organizations or for leaders. Ravin described his career as a journey in continuous reinvention. That same mindset is becoming a core leadership skill. In a world where assumptions expire quickly, the leaders who thrive will be the ones who can learn, unlearn, and relearn without getting stuck in old patterns. The second thought is that hiring is shifting from technical credentials to human capability. Technical skills still matter, but they no longer guarantee a 30-year career. Ravin emphasized that curiosity, learning agility, critical thinking, and cross-cultural collaboration are becoming the real filters for long-term success. Leaders need to hire for the person someone can become, not just the skills they bring today. The third idea is that reskilling beats churn, both economically and culturally. The Standard Chartered case was powerful. Rather than laying off people in sunset roles and paying premiums for sunrise skills, they proved it was cheaper and more effective to help employees make that transition. That's human-centric leadership in action. Treat people as long-term assets, not expendable costs. The fourth idea is that education and work need a new partnership. Ravin made a compelling point. Organizations can't assume schools will produce fully work-ready talent, and schools can't assume companies will develop all the human skills. The next era requires a tighter connection, blending technical foundations and the curiosity and breadth that help people adapt. Liberal arts strengths, real-world readiness. And the final idea is that AI can help leaders see, develop, and deploy skills with far more precision. Instead of thinking of AI as a replacement for human work, Ravin showed how it can act as the organization's intelligence layer, sensing changing demand, inferring skills people already have, and matching them to learning and project opportunities. It's a bridge to the flexible and flow models he described, where people move faster and grow faster. So here's the reflection I'd leave you with. Where do you need to unlearn an old assumption about jobs, careers, or qualified talent in order to lead in a more skills-powered, human-centric way? And maybe more importantly, what's one step you can take in the next month to treat your people not as positions to fill, but as evolving bundles of skills and potential to grow? That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And remember, you are the flame that can spark humanity at scale. One decision, one conversation, one moment at a time. Thanks for tuning in to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Remember, True leadership isn't only about achieving short-term results. It's about creating a lasting, positive impact on all of the people you touch. Join me next time as we uncover more insights and strategies for humanity-centric leadership. Until then, I'm Bruce Temkin, encouraging you to lead with purpose and empathy and to be the spark that elevates humanity at scale.